In today's business world, change is the only constant, and mastering transformation is the ultimate key to success. Welcome to Shift and Thrive. I'm your host, Natalie Nathanson. Each week, we'll bring you conversations with CEOs who delve into how they successfully drove critical change in their organization. This show is sponsored by Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service B2B marketing agency. I am delighted to welcome today's guest. He's a seasoned product strategy executive with over 25 years of experience in hardware product development. He spent 15 years living in China, overseeing the development and manufacturing of over 10 million product units. Through multiple executive leadership roles, he's scaled a tech startup from a team of 20 to over 350. He raised an impressive $150 million in VC funding, and his robotics expertise spans verticals including education, healthcare, retail logistics, and more. He is currently the COO and Chief Product Officer at Graze Robotics. Please welcome Phil Duffy to the show.
Thanks, Nat. Great to be here. Much appreciated.
Great to have you. So Phil, there are so many topics I want to get into with you, and I know that your product innovation background will bring some fresh perspectives to the topic of driving transformation. So I wanted to start by asking you, what is the biggest misconception out there about successfully driving major change in an organization?
The biggest misconception I've seen is the fact that the technology will take care of itself, that the human element isn't a factor. A lot of companies spend a lot of time focusing on the integration of the technology into other technology systems and not enough time thinking about the people that they're actually making a change to. The processes that people use, the current process, the new processes. It's not just a training package, right? A lot of people think about change management as in, we're going to bring in this new technology that's going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to provide a training package with it to train users. But it isn't really that. It's how do users do everything else around it now that this big change has happened? That I think is something we've done a really good job at my previous companies. Is something I've taken forward with the companies I've joined since then. But we brought technology into retail several years ago. In fact, it's interesting because the way I was first introduced to this space, the way I was looking at this technology was through the people lens, right? I was looking at robotics opportunities in retail, and we were trying to understand where robotics would provide those value. So I went in, did old school time and motion studies in retail stores. I looked at everything from shelf stocking to inventory management to a whole bunch of other different things for us to provide robotic technology to. And I built out a process map, from end to end, what people are doing, how long they're doing it, what are the steps they're taking, and how things could be improved through refining those processes. The same as I did in China for, as you mentioned, many years I was in China doing manufacturing, and we apply this process control to production lines. So I did exactly the same thing, at retailers looking at how they can make changes, and that allowed us to identify opportunities for robotics. And from there, we went through and looked at what were the lowest kind of lowest hanging fruit for us to approach. How could we get into this from a cost perspective, a technology perspective, product, yada 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 yada. That's all fairly standardized. Because I'd done all of that time and motion studies beforehand, when we came to actually, adopt our technology into these spaces at the final stage when we'd actually built it and developed it and gone through all those processes, I could go back to those process maps, say, hey, this is what people are doing currently. This is how we're changing it. Let's build process maps out for the new changes, not just for the things around our product, but all the aspects of this person's job. And building that process map out for all the other aspects really allowed us to control the environment we were launching our technology in, our new robots. It allowed us to get a much better dialogue going with the customer because it showed that we understood their problem. And their problem was beyond the technology that we were providing. And so, building that whole holistic approach, led by kind of design thinking, that's kind of how we looked at it initially. But, building that whole approach around process maps outside of the product we were developing, I think that was the biggest gain we made and probably the most overlooked element when new technologies are being implemented.
That's a really interesting insight. I'm curious, Phil, is that driven by the customer expectation, or is that more of the value add to ensure a successful implementation and adoption? Like, where does it come from?
Yes, the customer didn't expect that. Normal companies don't do that kind of work. Most vendors, especially in the vehicle space, when you're delivering a heavy machine, you just deliver a machine and a user manual. So no, the industry didn't tend to do that. The customer didn't expect that. But coming from that design thinking background and looking at how we were implementing this. It just seemed obvious to me that this wasn't going to be intuitive. I remember, we were delivering initially our robots were heavy industrial floor cleaning machines. So, heavy industrial machines that are being run by janitors. And so the janitors in these organizations across all the retailers we worked at, they're working at night, many of them working midnight till 7 a.m. Many of them, it might be their second job of the day. English wasn't always their first language. Education levels are low. And they weren't high on the totem pole of making change in the environment. All of the other activities, shelf stocking and, inventory management, and different things that happen in the store, they didn't have a lot of say. So us building out this process map helped the store understand this process change, helped all of the other employees that are working on different jobs understand this process change, and really help give the operator a set of guidelines that he could operate within and be successful. So that's kind of something that I initially led, and I've done it at every single company I've worked at since then, and it paves the way. Initially it's a big operation. There's a lot of people involved taking this change management through. Eventually, you get to the point where it becomes very refined, and it's a much quicker process, and we're able to build it out very quickly.
Yeah, yeah. It sounds hugely beneficial. I'm curious, in that process change documentation or documentation, what goes into that plan? What do you include in there?
It's funny because I mean, you and I did our MBAs together at Boston University, and one of the classes we had there was operations, and we had to build process maps as part of that class, and I'd built them before because I was in manufacturing. I'd never built them for process outside of manufacturing. And so, we went out there and we built in the teams we had during our MBA, we went out and built process maps. We actually went to a restaurant, Chinese restaurant, and looked at how they were making dumplings and built a whole process map around that. And so that was the approach. I went in there with the same approach that I used to do in manufacturing, with some of the new insights and analytics I gained from the MBA. And we did all time immersion studies. I had stopwatches and spreadsheets, and we built out this process maps initially that way. So and you've got to do it multiple times. You can't just do it once. You've got to do it multiple times, looking at the same thing, then in a different location, then in a different customer base. So again, you never want a customer view of a process. You want a market view of a process. So that's kind of what we did. But once we got that information, we found within a few little data points of difference. In general, it was fairly generic across all the customer groups we worked with, and that allows us to build new process maps to say, hey, if we change this, and we change the order that these things are done, and this is a wait time, we can build a robotic technology that's operating now, and then the operator of this robotic technology can now go and do X, Y, Z in these areas, and double up the efficiency during that time.
Got it. Got it. Thank you. You brought me back to some of the MBA days of some of those examples. We did another one on Chipotle, and their process documentation was really the impetus for them being leading edge in their automation kind of and optimization practices. So it certainly makes
Absolutely.
a big impact. Yeah. I'm curious, do you have any other examples of kind of how that change plan and kind of change management plan has kind of paved the way in some of the companies where you've been?
Yeah, I mean, so we started there to bring up that whole change management approach. And initially we started off at the worker level, the user level, then we build it up to the store level, then we build it up to the area level, and we get up to head office. And we build it at different levels, all the way from operating machine all the way to corporate reporting. But now we're starting to see that happen across the board. Robotics companies that are delivering these kind of machines into any kind of areas, whether it's warehouse management to retail to hospitals, are starting to build this as a process, becoming a standard, which is incredible. And we're also seeing a lot of it being automated. There's a number of companies now that are providing technology that allows you to monitor robotic operation. There's 4Month, there's in orbit, there's several others, and they're starting to build this process approach into their reporting as well, which is incredible. It's becoming much more standardized. You can build a very easy process that you can present to a customer. So we've done it there. We did it at hospitals. In my last company, we built a robotic character that used AI to have conversations with children. It was really designed for kids that had social emotional issues or had mental behavioral developmental issues. And so many kids that are on the spectrum and those kind of problems. And so we built this interaction system that took a child through a whole journey of social emotional learning, improved their confidence, helped their communication skills, and many other areas. But we started to look at how this could be used in hospitals. And we tried a number of different things. We worked with a great hospital, the Children's Hospital at the University of Rochester in New York, upstate New York. And we started looking at, what are the opportunities for this kind of technology? One of the big things was surgery. Kids come into surgery and they're obviously distraught. They're worried about what's going on. At some point they have to leave their parents. It's a big, scary environment. But you think of surgery and you think, well, it's all going to be different, right? One surgery is this and another surgery is that. And we don't know how long they're going to be. But the pre and post surgery operations in a hospital are fairly standardized. And so we were able to take standardized processes, build out process maps as we always do, and then look at opportunities to bring in this robotic technology. Moxie was the robot to work with children in that environment. And that allowed the child to feel comfortable, allowed the child to engage with someone, ask questions about what was about to happen, and Moxie could answer those kind of questions. And then what was exciting was then the staff, the clinical staff, could then remove themselves a little bit from that scenario and spend time on other areas where, they're always rushed in those environments. So again, the same approach. How do we take a technology that we think has an advantage, work with the clinicians to understand their problems, process map their problems out, go back, confirm it. Like, do we understand what we're seeing here? Are we seeing what you're seeing? Oh yeah, you know what? You guys actually really do understand our problem. Hey, we think we can fix it with this, and this is how we can measure it, and this is how you can measure it. Let's see if this works. So yeah, I've done it several times. I'm about to do it at the new company when we start to launch robots here. But that approach to understanding what's happening, making a change to it, and getting everybody on the same page, it's usually valuable.
Yeah. I love that example too. I mean, especially you think of hospitals, staff shortages and a range of, let's say, bedside manner of different staff. And so this kind of helps solve for that in a really cool way.
Yeah, and if you can lower anxiety for a child, before they go into a procedure like this, not only does it, lower clinical time with the child, recovery is faster. The drugs that they have to go through, aren't as heavy. You don't have to give, as high doses. So it's all about kind of managing anxiety and using technology too.
Yeah, very cool. How do you think about kind of the roles involved in a change like this? Right, I would imagine there's the practitioners, the business executives, the technology leadership. Right. How do you do that? And then what are the expectations of kind of customer expectations on their end versus kind of you as the vendor?
Great question. The problem with emerging technology is, you've got to sell it 50 different times into the same organization before it gets understood, right? Especially anything where you're changing process or changing labor practices. When we look at purchase of large industrial machinery, for example, industrial cleaning machines, industrial vegetation management machines, whatever it's going to be, and you've got a human running those machines. The purchase of those machines generally goes through a standardized RFP process and is handled by their capital equipment group. And it comes out of the capital budget. And, there's a 9 months process where they examine, look at alternatives and yada, 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 yada. It doesn't work with like emerging technology because often those other products don't exist, or you don't have a fully fleshed out product yet. You're still at a hypothesis level and you're working with the customer to really refine that product. And so it's actually really hard to get standardized practices like RFPs and capital budgets assigned to new emerging technology projects So we tend to go through the operating group. We turn around and we say, hey, operating group, you're spending this much a month on labor. We think we can help reduce that, or we think we can help increase their, efficiency by, this new technology. And it costs a lot of money to build these big machines that we manufacture and we build. But again, being able to approach the customer and say, hey, I'm not going to charge you for the machine. Don't worry about that. Let's sign an agreement here where there's going to be a monthly lease, allows you to use it. You can use your operating budget. It's a very easy sell. It's a much lower dollar price. They can experience the machine. You can go through the process change with them, work with the change management. And as they start to see that this system's working and they're benefiting from it, then the introduction happens to the capital expense crew. And we can talk about, capital expense purchases as you scale the fleet at a later stage. So I tend to find that approach is the easiest. So the first thing I do is I look for innovation groups within any space because that's a great introduction. You can always knock on a door, go, robots, someone in innovation is going to answer that door. Generally, my experience is innovation folks do not have a lot of power and they certainly don't have a lot of budget. And so what you're looking for from an innovation group is an introduction to an operating crew. Then you're looking at the operating crew, looking at the, going through the whole process, understanding their problem, providing the solution, going through the deployment, yada, 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 yada. Again, in terms of the operating budget, building that out, and then onto the, the capital purchase for expansion. I'd say there's a couple of other elements in there you've got a hardcore sale into. One is IT. What do you mean you've got new technology in my space? I didn't approve it. Is it going to work with this? What are the security risks? So going through that process and understanding their needs, their compliance requirements, and making sure that we meet those compliance requirements, that we can work together. So there's a level of understanding, acceptance, and comfort with the IT. And the last area with anything robotic is liability. So it's the legal group. So what happens if there's a problem? Is it going to, have an issue with this? Where do we stand on safety? Going through, making sure there's a comfort level there, that the, liability is covered in any contracts we have. So I'd say that kind of our approach. And then once you've got all those through, once you've got the innovation guys on board, you've sold through to the operating team, you've sold through to IT and legal. At that point, then you can start moving up the chain to senior management and at the corporate office level. And, you're having conversations around expansion, and then it moves into operating budgets at the CapEx kind of level. That tends to be the cycle we follow.
That's really it sounds pragmatic and impactful. I think a great example of why those like proofs of concept are so valuable. Whether it's kind of validating what you already went into it with, or, I was just talking to a CEO of a startup offering software for sales managers, and what they thought was a widget through the POCs, they ended up pivoting, and kind of a small element of the product ended up opening up a whole new direction, and now that's what they're scaling up. So you never know what that real-time feedback will deliver.
So that's what we did at BrainCorp, and is what I'm trying to do at Graze right now as well. Robots are useful when you've got like the three basic problems that robots solve. If something's dull, dirty, or dangerous, whether a robot's cleaning the floor, delivering goods, lifting heavy equipment, whatever it's doing, dull, dirty, dangerous is the entry point. If you can, solve one, two, or three of those, you're providing value. But the real advantage of robotics is data. Humans are terrible at collecting data. And so our plan with, entry into the retail space was the same. It was, enter with a dull, dirty, dangerous solution, expand that to, an opportunity that could really, provides data to the customer. And so at Walmart, for example, the major retailers we worked with, we started off cleaning their floors. And then as we were cleaning their floors, we started scanning all their shelves and going, hey, this is what's missing. This is what you're low on. This is what's misplaced. And providing reports to their head office that they can then run, say, hey, we need to stop this. We need to change this. We need to change that. And it became an actual revenue generator rather than just a money saving technology. And so that was a really big step for us, to the point where they said, you know what, your cleaning machines that scan shelves are great, but we actually need dedicated shelf scanning and we can work all day long. And so that was the new product line that BrainCorp brought out. And now they've got multiple product lines in that space as well. And it's the same with where I am now. I'm doing vegetation management in large areas, really focusing on the solar space. So again, can I go in and clean, cut the vegetation on a 1,000 acre or 5,000 acre site, which is just enormous. Multiple machines operating 7 days a week, 7 hours a day. But while I'm doing that, can I actually scan the panels and look at what's misaligned, what's broken, what's dirty, what needs servicing, and provide that information back to the customer? So again, start dull, dirty, dangerous. Data is where the real value comes from.
That's great. I really like that mental framework. I know that's going to stick with me, and I'm sure listeners as well. Thank you. So Phil, I wanted to, you're talking about all these different examples. I wanted to talk about what is the biggest change that you personally have driven in an organization?
I mean, I drove those ones I mentioned. When I first started at Brain, I came on board to actually, roll out the robotics program. I mean, when I joined, it was 20 neuroscience PhDs that had done white paper research for 5 years as part of a group of Qualcomm, and had looked at how the human brain processes vision and how the brain processes memory. And the insights into that gave them, enough confidence they could take that and build a, compute technology that would now enable a robot to navigate. But then they were like, "Oh, Phil, we don't know anything about robotics. Can you come in and find a market for us, find an opportunity, find a problem to solve, find define a product?" And we did that, at those groups. So I'd say the biggest change I've made is taking an emerging technology. I'm sure we did this at Business School as well. The biggest thing is you never want to develop a technology searching for a problem. You always want to solve a problem that exists. So, I came on board with a group that had a technology or the potential of a technology looking for a problem to solve. And that's never a good approach from a business perspective. But, the group was powerful. I liked the minds there. I liked kind of where the thought process was going. And I thought if this was ever going to work, this is the group to do it with. And so I took that on, and I started looking for problems that could be solved, not with the technology we have, because again, then you're squeezing a square peg into a round hole, but that could be solved with the overarching kind of philosophy of our technology. And then we could build a custom product to solve those problems. So that was kind of our entry to market. There was a desire at the time to be a software company, not a hardware company. And so the goal was, hey, Phil, can you apply a technology to an existing product as opposed to going to manufacturing and build it? That's always challenging, right? Because now you've got integration issues, you've got, this, that, and the other. It means you can't build a dedicated machine to solve a dedicated problem. But we managed to do that. We partnered with some great groups out there that we still partner with today. And we're able to bring out a whole new line of robotic products that didn't exist, right? That took existing manual machines and transform them into, automated robots. That was a really big change to make. It was a new business model change. It was a completely different team change. I mean, we took a team of scientists that researched and wrote white papers and turned them into, technology engineers in the robotic space. I think one of the biggest, it's not really a change, but one of the biggest risks I took, I got a lot of trouble for this. One of the biggest risks I took was we developed the technology. We developed like a product company. We bought these products, secondhand, brought them into our site, refitted them, worked them out, built them into actual working robots, worked with end use customers, retailers, got these prototypes into their spaces, worked with them for 6-9 months to refine the technology to the point where the customer's like, you know what, this works. We're ready to put an order in. And at that point we said, stop. We don't manufacture machines, but we've got OEM partners. And then we hit up our, the major top tier partners within the space that, manufacture these machines. And these are multi-billion-dollar companies, multinationals, but each one of them, the top tier group, have been around for over 100 years. So very old companies, very old approach technology. They didn't have this kind of robotic technology in-house. And so they were all interested in it, but they were all like, hey, you guys are a nobody 15-person, 20-person startup out of San Diego. Yes, we want to work with you, but we want to be exclusive. And this is how much we want to pay. And this is the business model. And it was very obvious that we would be essentially acquired for pennies on the pound. And there was no real future for us to grow into a company we went to this market that way. So I made a recommendation. I think we were 30 people at the time. I made a recommendation to the CEO that we actually turn down these offers from the the multinationals, and that we target the second tier products in this space. They don't have the technology capabilities. They don't have the large factories. They didn't have the large customer groups. But we did. We turned the top guys down, Tent and Nilfisk and Karcher, all huge companies. We turned them down and went to the second tier. We signed 4 of the second tier, and they all jumped at it. They're like, "Oh my God, you're giving us an opportunity to compete with the big guys. Where do we sign?" We named our own pricing, our own terms, our own business model, changed the whole thing, went to market with them, and within a year, all of the top tier had come back and signed with us. So it took us a while, and the CEO was, his heart was in his mouth for a year, because again, there would have been a large payment that came from the top tier if we'd worked with them. We were going through funding rounds as a startup. Pulling in funding is always a challenge. And so it was a huge risk to say no and go with the second tier. And then, by doing that, we were able to work with the second tier and the top tier and set our own pricing and our own business model and make a whole change to that market.
Wow.
I'm not sure I'd have the guts to do that again, though.
You followed your gut and it paid off, but risks are called risks for a reason, right? Yeah. I'm curious, just as you think about kind of what you implemented in that organization at that phase of the business, anything you would do differently in hindsight now? I know hindsight's 2020.
Yeah, what's great is the company I recently joined is, it's in a similar space. It's outdoors. We're focusing on clean energy sites, etc. But the go-to-market and the product definition, the go-to-market strategy is very similar. And so yes, we've got a full hindsight opportunity now to go to market, do what we did before, but without the R&D, without us experimenting with business models, without us experimenting with go-to-market strategies, without us experimenting with how's the best way to partner in this space. And so we've already done that at prior companies, and I've hired a lot of the guys I used to work with as well. So there's a number of guys in this team that I've done this with before. And the goal for us is to do this at an accelerated pace much quicker than we did at BrainCorp, and hopefully with less mistakes. And so, just less experimentation, I would say. Less experimentation with price, less experimentation with the business model, less experimentation with our go-to-market strategy and the different steps we take to acquire a customer.
So it sounds like you do have this kind of approach that you found works for you. Do you have kind of a philosophy for how you think about product development and product strategy?
A little bit, yeah. I mean, as I mentioned, the overarching for me is provide value. One of the reasons I actually like the commercial space over the consumer space is that it's very easy, if you do your work properly and you build your process maps and you understand the process you're selling into, it's very easy to assign a dollar value to what's currently being done and a dollar value to the new process, and then look at opportunities to increase value with new technology. So, the process I take is, again, understanding the market, understanding the functional aspects you're trying to solve, building out process maps to really understand that. Then looking at, the size of the market and really getting into market segmentation. I'm not a huge fan of one large TAM number, like, oh, this is the size of the market, you have to invest in us. Because generally, when you segment that down to what you can really solve and who you can really sell to, it's a much smaller segment. So market segmentations is a hardcore belief for me. Understanding what that market looks like, what the channels to that market is, understanding the needs of that market, and then building out a roadmap of technology that allows us to enter into new markets. So that's a big, point that I follow. Solving pain points is obviously critical to everything we do, and actually having dollar values associated to those pain points. There's a big thing, and this goes back to the change in management question you asked earlier, that the belief is, well, we're doing it this way today. Whatever technology you bring in needs to be able to do 100% of that. And that is never the case with robotic integration, certainly not with the kind of robots we build. And so going through that change system so that the customer is aware that we're able to provide value, even if the solution we're providing isn't 100% of the old solution. That you can turn around and say, hey, this is what you did before. This is 8 hours of work. We can reduce that down significantly and allow you to be a lot more functional in these other areas. But no, we're not going to do everything that a human was able to do in those 8 hours. We're going to do this percentage of it. And this is how that's going to provide value. And this is how it scales. So I think that's a big part of it. Being aware that there is an opportunity to provide value without it having to be 100% of what a human is doing.
Yeah, yeah. And that's that human and robot collaboration, right?
Always, always, absolutely.
Yeah.
Robots can't take jobs. You hear a lot of it. Oh, the technology's taking over, AI is taking over, robots going to take over. Robots will never be able to take jobs. What they can take is tasks, and tasks can be sewn together. But humans are so flexible; they're able to do so many different things. Now, humanoid robots are slightly different. I think that's still a long way away from the development they're in now. But when we're talking about the kind of autonomous mobile robots we're looking at, the wheeled robots, the leg robots that are out operating today, they have a task they can solve. But humans are a lot more flexible. The goal shouldn't be to replace humans. The goal should be to make humans more effective.
Yeah, yeah. I would agree. And I think a lot of the discussions, like thinking about like generative AI, for example, right now is really the replacement of jobs. And we're talking a lot internally about the AI enabled marketer. It's not, human or AI.
Right, absolutely. I mean, look, we've gone through these before as a culture. Back in the what is it, the early 80s, I guess, when graphic design was all handprint, when newspapers were put together by people with drawing out letters and sticking letters on the board and go through a full print process, a reprographic process. Then desktop publishing came in and changed that overnight. And there were a bunch of guys that were like, no, you know what? I'm an artist and I have the skills of an artist. I'm done. I'm not going to stay in this space. And there are other guys that are like, you know what? I'm a designer and whatever makes me more effective, I will adopt and I'll jump on it. And we're going to see the same with everything today, whether it's like, Photoshop having generative AI visual capabilities or ChatGPT being able to write a script more efficiently than a marketer could have written by themselves, or generating new product names, or whatever it is. It just makes people more effective. But the robot isn't going to be able to do all of the tasks. They're not going to replace a human.
Right. Which I
AI
suppose is a very good thing for us.
Yes.
So Phil, I wanted to fast forward back to today and your current role. Can you talk about, what is the biggest challenge or priority that you're focused on this year?
Yeah, I mean, we are working again. This whole approach to market segmentation is core to go-to-market for me. And so, when you look at today, the main product that we're launching, Graze Robotics, is a large industrial mowing machine, a large industrial, fully autonomous mowing machine. It's a big system. It's got a 5 foot wide cut deck on it, so it can handle large areas. It's 9 feet long. It's a tractor and a separate cut deck. All the autonomy exists in the tracker itself. We navigate and localize through RTK GPS. We're able to understand where we are and assess the environment with our 360-degree LiDAR. And then we have all of the other areas, magnetic world encoders and kind of IMU systems that allow us to get positional data. And so I'm very aware that with an expensive technology like an expensive robot, the way you provide the most value is you enable the robot to operate as long as possible without a human in the loop. That's the goal. And so in many of the applications you see with robots, they operate for an hour or two, and then someone gets involved. They move the robot to a new location, or there's a new task that the robot has to perform. The human says, oh, yeah, now I want you to do this. Or there's a situation where they're changing batteries or whatever it is. We're trying to build a system that has a large amount of robots that can operate as a like a swarm in a very large area. And like 5,000 acres is about 8 square miles, just endless miles of salt fields. So robots can operate 7, 8 hours a day, trundle back to their recharge station, self-dock, self-charge, and self-deploy next morning onto the same area or a new area, um, and essentially go days and days and days without human interaction. That's the goal. Yeah, no one's doing this. This will be the first time any robotics company has had the goal of robots operating for days without human intervention. So that is our goal. It's lofty. Part of it is the robotic side. Part of it is our approach to AI and how we look at large area planning, how we set out the ability to look at operational areas, plan routes on very large areas for these robots, enabling them all to share maps and share mode plans, etc. So there's a big AI component to it as well in the cloud, as well as the fully autonomous elements. But I think the excitement and the challenges are how do we do this quickly with a small team, knowing what we know from doing it before? How can we execute this plan? It's a very lofty plan with as minimal number of missteps possible. I think that's kind of what's exciting me this time.
Yeah, yeah, that's pretty cool. Like a greenfield opportunity and mission like that is very fun and energizing to be a part of.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole how do we do this and build the team and get everybody on side and get everyone behind the mission, and how do we do this with a distributed team with some folks in the development office and other folks in other areas, and keep all of that team dynamic together. I think obviously COVID helped with remote work and that solved some of those problems, but getting people on a mission is always challenging.
Yeah, yeah. The alignment and excitement has to be authentic, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Phil, I'd love to transition a bit and ask you a bit about you and how did you go from, Phil as a child to getting into kind of robotics and innovation and product, and can you talk a little bit about that, and when did you know that this would be your field?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as you can tell with my sketchy accent, I grew up in the UK. My undergrad was engineering. I took a manufacturing, mechanical engineering, industrial design kind of undergrad. So I graduated with that space. I come from a very industrial town in the UK, Birmingham, second largest towns where the Industrial Revolution started. They've been manufacturing things there for 300 years. So I grew up in a town with the blood of manufacturing. It was, my father was in large automotive manufacturing space, and so I grew up with that kind of in the blood anyway. But I didn't want to stay in the UK. I didn't want to work in factories. I wanted to do something new, explore the world. And so, straight out of graduation, I moved to Hong Kong and China. I wanted to see what was going on over there. I had some friends. I followed my interest in, Asian culture. And, China was the world's factory at the time. It was very easy for me to take my undergrad background and say, hey, how can I help? I planned to be gone for, 6 months, maybe if things extended. I ended up staying over there for 16 years, which was incredible. I loved everything about it. What really got me into it, obviously the engineering side was interesting for me. I actually loved the cultural aspect of learning the language, learning the culture behind Chinese, and then being that cultural bridge between either the Westerners that we had in the company or the Western customers we had and our developers in China. And so one of my favorite parts of that, and what kept me there as long as it did, was really, understanding that culture, learning that new culture, and being able to become that representative to both sides. I fully enjoyed that. But while we were there, we built a number of different products, and a lot of what we built was robots. And robots just, it got to me when I saw a machine not just being able to move, because we could do that in a number of different products, but a machine that was able to make a decision and then change its behavior based on that decision. I think that's what hooked me. Growing up, when I grew up, there was kind of two promises in the last century. One was flying cars, and the other one with, robots. And, everything from the Jetsons to Star Wars to everything else, Hollywood had presented this image of robots. And my big frustration was, well, if that's great, if we know what they're meant to do, why don't we have them here? And so that was the pathway that got me into robotics. I got really interested by it. We worked on a number of different products that did make it to market, a whole bunch that didn't. But over time, kind of technology improved, the processes have improved. Robotics is very different to, designing for, things like a cell phone or a laptop. Today, in those spaces, the hardware is ubiquitous. Everybody knows what they're designing for. There's an industry standard. There is no industry standard for robotics yet. And so the hardware is different for pretty much every single robotics application, which means the electronics and the software that goes with it can be different as well. And it makes it a challenge, right? You're trying to solve a problem that is hard to solve with machines. So I found that very exciting. And as we started to see the automotive industry become more and more technically adept and start adding different sensor systems to cars, the pricing reducing those sensor systems and allowing the robotics industry to adopt them. Compute became simpler, and more powerful. Compute moved to the cloud for some of these aspects. And so all of a sudden, enabling technology really came along. So I've been doing robotics for over 20 years. And I'd say the real autonomous mobile, not Roomba, right? Roomba's a very basic system in the home, but robots are able to operate at a commercial level that can provide value the way a human can provide value. That's a fairly new thing. That's in the last 10 years. And it really came about by, all of these growth in technologies and reduction costs due to the automotive industry. That's where things really started to get exciting. And so we're going to see big things happening in robotics in the next 5 years, certainly in the next 10. But for me, that was kind of the interest, coming from an engineering background, then into China, then going, wow, these machines could come alive if we solve these big problems. But I got frustrated in one point. I got frustrated being the engineer that had the ideas that, why can't we take these to market? Why isn't this working? So that's when I went back to business school. I went back to business school at a much older age. I was 40 when I started at BU, which is crazy. But I wanted to solve the front end problems as well, not just the, how do we make something, but how do we get it adopted? So really what I find the most interesting today isn't necessarily how do we build a product. I've done that so many times these days. What I find interesting is what are the opportunities out there? What can we adopt? How do we need to change human behavior and process to get it adopted? And how do we actually get this technology to market? Not from a sales and marketing perspective necessarily, but from a human adoption perspective. And that's what keeps me fascinated today, is how do we make a real change in the space we're in?
That's really interesting to hear that journey. I knew parts of it, but very, very fascinating set of experiences. I'm curious, what are some of the innovations in robotics that you're particularly excited about, maybe outside of the ones that you're directly involved in?
Yeah, totally. So there's a couple of things happening. Obviously, there's a ton of money going into humanoids right now. Figure AI earlier this year pulled in $675 million investment, which is the largest in the robotics industry ever. At I think a $2.7 billion valuation, which is just,
Wow.
insane. And so with that investment, humanoid robotics is really hard to solve. It's super, super hard. You've got a lot of information that's coming into the robot. You've got a completely different approach to understanding where you are, battery management, weight to power ratios. Oh, yeah, it's a complex thing. But as they start to solve all of those elements, that those solutions start to trickle down to the rest of the robotics industry. And so a couple of things are happening. The two biggest, I would say, are the concept of multimodal AI is on its way. There's rudimentary versions of it out there, but it hasn't exploded yet the way that language-based AI has. So, ChatGPT launched, changed the industry. There's a number of companies that are working on their own large language model, including my last company. When I first joined, we were building our own large language model, all natural language processing based, very exciting stuff. And then, along came ChatGPT and Llama 2 and several of the groups, and we moved our system to them because they were accelerating so quickly, it made no sense for us to build it. And so all of those elements are based on language. It's based taking data points from, across the web and accessing it and saying, hey, this is how language is used. What are the rules behind this language? How can we take that and start generating our own language based on, all these rules? That doesn't work for robotics because it's just language. Robots need to see the world. They need to operate, and they need to know, when they see an obstacle, what happens if they only see half the obstacle? What happens if it's at a weird angle that isn't, on the web somewhere? What happens if it's shadowed or, it's behind a bright light or in front of a bright light? robots see the world differently. So until we start taking all of that multimodal information, all of that video information out there, and start really building AI off that, it's not going to benefit the robotics industry, but that is coming. And so in robotics, there's several different, problems that you have to solve. One of the biggest one is perception. What can I see? What do I understand about the environment I can see? And so this approach to multimodal AI will accelerate that understanding of perception a million times. It's going to be a challenge because, you know, any of this, high-end AI is going to be running in the cloud, and it costs a lot more to process video and multimodal information than it does language, right? So it's going to be a very expensive processing thing. It's all going to be cloud-based. And if you're waiting on that information to be processed in the cloud, fed down to a robot, and then a robot's going to make a decision, that's a very slow process. So we've got to get to the point where at least certain levels of that are able to operate on board the robot itself. So there's no latency in decision making. You don't want a robot that's trundling along, or a self-driving car that someone jumps in front of it and it's got to wait for a cloud-based decision to be made before it can hit the brakes, right? So you want certain things you want processing on board, certain things you want in the cloud. So that's what's coming, right? This concept of multimodal AI, and then on the edge processing on a machine, and cloud processing. The other thing that's being accelerated right now is battery systems. So, all of the power systems that are really accelerating with electric cars, they are accelerating the research, and really it's about weight to power ratio. The more power you can offer at a smaller form factor and a lower weight, the more powerful a machine can be. So again, with a robot, half the problem with robotics today is the robot has to be able to carry its own weight, and carrying a big battery pack is a problem. So I think those two elements are the most exciting things that are coming in robotics. The third one, which we'll see about, is kind of industry standard operating systems. They don't really exist today, again, primarily because the hardware systems are not ubiquitous yet. But all of the robot companies today are building full stack. They're building all of the problems themselves. They're solving all the problems themselves. They're, navigation they're solving, perception they're solving, locomotion they're solving, manipulation with hands they're solving, communication they're solving. We need to get to the point where it's a multi-stack approach. So they're using BrainCorp for indoor navigation. They're using Boston Dynamics for locomotion. They're using, embodied robotics for communication systems and emotional content. They're using, another group for perception. And so I'm hoping that we can get to that point where we've got a multi-stack approach in the next 5 years, but we'll see how the industry progresses.
Yeah. Well, certainly we're at a key inflection point in the industry, and a lot that is likely to change in a very exciting way soon. So, Phil, I wanted to ask you, knowing what you know now and the experiences you've had along your career, what advice would you give your younger self in your first ever leadership role?
Ooh, first ever leadership role. Chill out. Don't worry about it. It's not that bad. It's not a reflection on you. When I was young, when I was in my late 20s and early 30s and I was managing teams, often I was the only Westerner. The teams were Chinese, or there was a mix of Western Chinese teams, and there was cultural differences. And so working with those teams to understand kind of what was going on, how I could best help them, I think I didn't really understand that early on. I took that leadership was management. And it was much later in my career that I understood that management is a small part of leadership, and that leadership is a much bigger thing. Leadership is not just how do I organize projects. It's how do I inspire? How do I solve problems that my team have that are immediate, and how do I get out of the way to allow them to operate well. At BU, we read a lot about the servant model of leadership, and I've really taken that on board. That's kind of how I try to approach things now. And so leadership for me actually starts at the hiring process. It never used to. I inherited teams, I brought people in, we'll train them up. Now it starts with the hiring process, and I'm looking less for skills, but attitude, and getting the right fit is much more important to me than technical capabilities. And then if you get the right fit, those capabilities will increase. You'll get the right dynamic going, especially in startups, right? You can't afford to have people in startups that don't have good fit. And so I think getting the right people involved, building the right dynamic, setting the right direction so the team is motivated and are able to, see the same vision, and then solving immediate problems when those problems need to be solved, and then getting the hell out of the way. That's my approach to leadership now is so much simpler than it used to be. My God, it's so much simpler. Because I'm not trying to manage as much these days. I'm not trying to certainly micromanage. I'm trying to lead.
That's very well said. Thank you for that. And I think that's a great place for us to wrap. So, Phil, before we finish up our conversation, can you let our listeners know how they can reach you?
Yeah, I mean, hit me up on LinkedIn. Look me up, Phil Duffy, Graze Robotics. In fact, where's my actual URL? I'll tell you right now. It is, so it's linkedin.com/in/Philip F. Duffy /. So that's me. Look me up on LinkedIn, send me a note. Love to hear from anyone. If you're interested in product strategy, product management, startups, startup leadership, robotics, obviously, I'd love to hear from you.
Thanks, Phil. Thanks. This was a really great discussion.
Thanks, I appreciate the time.
Of course. And thank you to everyone who's listening. I'll share that I personally loved hearing about so much of what Phil shared, from some of the innovative use cases and healthcare and the large scale landscaping, his framework for change management, and the focus on market segmentation, which is very near and dear to me. So if today's episode gave you new and valuable perspectives, and I'm pretty sure it did, please share this episode with someone. Spreading this kind of knowledge and insights helps all of us grow as leaders and sets us up to drive successful innovation and transformation in our organization. So thanks again, Phil. And this has been another great episode of Shift and Thrive. See you all next time. That's a wrap for this week's episode. For show notes and more, visit shiftandthrivepodcast.com. A special thank you to our sponsor, Magnitude Consulting, bringing you the thinking power of a growth consultancy and the getting it done power of a full-service marketing agency to help B2B companies fuel their growth. For more information on Magnitude and to get your complimentary transformation readiness assessment, visit magnitudeconsulting.com/getready. Thank you so much for listening. We'll see you next week.